Yo, what's up? Welcome to Tufting 101. Today I will be making this rug for you and explaining every step of the process as I go. In other episodes I talk about the equipment and materials you need and also the money you're gonna have to spend. But today we're just talking about how to actually tuft the dang thing. So let's waste no time, there's a lot to cover. Let's start off with your tufting gun. To thread your tufting gun, use a thin loop of wire and send it through the needle and up through the ring. Put your yarn through the loop and then pull it all right back out. The thread should be going through the top of the needle. You can thread 2 or even 3 strands of yarn using the same method. On most tufting guns, you can adjust the speed at which it tufts. On the AK1 and the AK2, there is a knob on the bottom of the handle to do just that. Lower speeds will be much easier to control, while faster speeds make the process go faster. While tufting, be sure you apply decent pressure to the tufting fabric. You don't need to push super hard, but if you're too light with it, it can cut your primary fabric. To move around with your tufting gun, you always need to keep the gun pointing in the direction of travel. So if you want to tuft up, the gun has to be pointing up. If you then want to tuft to the right, you need to turn the entire gun in that direction before you do so. The distance apart that you tuft your rows will determine how thick and full the surface of your rug is. To have a great looking rug, try and stay consistent with your spacing between rows. Keeping your tufting gun clean is very important to keeping it working. To clean your tufting gun, it helps to use WD-40 and a brush to sweep away the yarn and gunk that builds up. However, WD-40 is a solvent, not a lubricant. So if you use WD-40, be sure you also lubricate your gun to keep it running properly. I like to use sewing machine oil as my lubricant, but there are many that'll do the job. Next up, let's talk about the yarn. The yarn is definitely a very important part of tufting. The key is to make sure that your yarn is feeding nicely, as friction-free as you can. Ideally, it's not running up against any surfaces or lifting its own weight. A good way to do this is to have little hooks on your frame that you can feed the yarn through. Another tip is to make sure that you're starting your yarn ball properly. Lots of people don't know that there are multiple ways to start a yarn bundle. There's the way where it wraps around the outside. That's not the way we want. Then it has to unroll itself, and that's a lot of weight and friction that we don't need. You can also start the yarn bundle by pulling the strand out from the side of it. This will start pulling the yarn from the center of the bundle, and it'll feed out no problem super nicely. You'll just overall have a much better yarn experience if you're using a bundle and feeding it out this way. However, you can also just use a yarn cone, and usually that'll help you escape all of these problems. With yarn, I do recommend using multiple strands at once. I personally use 2 strands at once for all of my rugs. Using 2 strands at once helps in several ways. It'll help you tuft a more consistent rug surface. It'll prevent the yarn from coming out of your needle, and it'll just make the whole process go quicker. Overall, I see really no drawbacks to using multiple strands of yarn at once, and for this reason, I do actually always buy 2 of the same color of yarn every time I buy yarn. Alright, let's talk about the primary fabric. To stretch your primary fabric, I recommend using carpet tack strips. Start by tacking down one side to the carpet tack strips. I'll then go over to the other side and pull it tight, tack it down. Do the other side, pull it tight, tack it down. Other side, pull it tight, tack it down. And just kind of go around it until it's all tight all around. You don't need to pull it super tight, but you definitely want it like pretty taut. You don't want any like loose areas that'll kind of mess you up. So just give it a feel, make sure it feels pretty tight. It's definitely important that you're stretching your primary fabric on a nice sturdy frame. You want it well secured and it won't move while you're tufting. Let's talk about transferring the art onto the primary fabric. It's important to remember to mirror any image that you're going to be transferring. This is because we're tufting from the back side of the rug, so the top side of the rug, which is what you'll be seeing, is actually going to be a mirrored version of what you're doing on the back. A few of the techniques I know for transferring art are using a projector, which is going to be the easiest, probably the cleanest. You can also use a grid to transfer the art. Basically, you just make a grid on your art and then put that same grid but scaled up onto the primary fabric, and then just copy the art square for square. I do have a video on my channel going more in depth on how to use a grid. I will link that below. Or you can just freehand it and just sketch it out. I kind of like doing it that way. Once you are all done tufting, it is adhesive time. But first, look over your rug, and if there are any pieces of yarn that are kind of in the wrong spot, you can just pull those out. It's good to do that before the adhesive because the glue really locks it in. Now it's very important to apply the adhesive to your rug while it's still stretched on your frame. We are also going to let it completely dry this way too. If you don't, the rug will have this gnarly curl and it's super difficult to get that curl out, so it's best just to leave it to dry while it's stretched on the frame. My go-to glue for this step is just general purpose flooring adhesive. It's cheap, it works great, it's flexible, it's washable, I love it. I just use a spreader to spread the glue all over the rug. You want to make sure that all of the yarn has some glue on it so nothing gets yanked out later. As long as you do that first coat thoroughly, one coat will be enough. In my experience, it takes about 12 hours for the glue to dry if there's a fan on it, and about 24 hours for the glue to dry with no fan. Next up, let's talk about the backing. The backing is a piece of fabric that we'll use to seal off the back of the rug. The backing will help reinforce the rug a bit, and also it just looks nice. To apply a backing, we'll have to find some way to glue fabric onto the back of the rug without it going over the edge and showing onto the top side of the rug. If your rug is a square or a circle, this is fairly straightforward. You just need a shape of fabric slightly smaller than the size of your rug. Many people use spray adhesive to apply their backings. Spray adhesive is quick, easy, and holds great. I don't like to use it just because it really has a toxic smell to it. I don't love it. I prefer to just use more of the flooring adhesive. I'll spread on a second coat and then apply my backing while it is still wet. It's important to then let it dry under some weight to make sure that the whole backing is in contact with the rug. You can also mount your rug onto wood if you're going to be hanging it on the wall. In this case, the wood acts as a backing and you don't need a fabric layer between the two. Next up, we're going to talk about binding your rug. As far as I know, you have 3 solid options for binding your rug. You can do a waterfall bind, a whip stitch, or take it somewhere to get it professionally bound. On the rug I'm making in this video, I will be doing half of it with a waterfall bind and half of it with a whip stitch, just for demonstration purposes. Doing a waterfall bind is the easiest, quickest, and it still looks great. I do this on most of my rugs now. The order of this video is a little bit confusing because you'll actually want to do a waterfall bind before you do the backing. This is because to do a waterfall bind, you fold over the edges of the primary fabric, pulling a bit of the rug's surface over the edge, kind of like a waterfall, and then gluing it down on the back of the rug. I find that hot glue works terrific here. Once you have all of the edges of the primary fabric glued down to the back of the rug, you will then apply the backing to kind of seal it all up and cover all these edges. Doing a whip stitch bind is definitely a bit more complicated of a process. To do it, you'll need a large yarn needle, one like this without really a point on it. Start by cutting 2 strands of yarn that are the length of one of your wingspans. Then use a paper clip or a piece of wire to thread those strands of yarn through the needle. Pull the needle to the center of those strands of yarn, and you are now ready to whip stitch. To start the whip stitch, stab the needle through the top of the rug right up against the edge of the rug's surface. Pull the needle and yarn almost all the way through, leaving just like an inch of yarn on the top of the rug. You then wrap the needle around and stab it through the top of the rug again, right next to where you did it the first time. Pull that tight, whip it around, stab it through the top again, pull it tight, and just keep doing that, slowly covering that section of initial yarn that was left hanging out on the top. You do that not only to hide the extra yarn that was hanging out, but it also helps hold everything down and in place. Do that for the entire length of yarn that you had cut, and once you get to the end of that strand, starting a new one is very similar to how we started the first one. Just cut that yarn to free your needle, thread your needle again, stab it through the top, pull it almost all the way through again. But this time when we wrap around, we want to make sure we're going around both the extra threads on the top of the rug, but also the extra threads on the bottom of the rug. Again, this holds everything in place and also hides all the extra yarn ends. Continue this process all the way around the edge of the rug. I have my clock in frame there so you can see about how long it takes. And once you've done it all and you get all the way to the end, pull it through one last time. And I like to finish it off by cutting the yarn and then just tying a knot there on the back just to make sure that it doesn't come through. And boom! That is how you whip stitch the rug. It's kind of a nice process, but it does take a lot longer than the waterfall bind. So usually I go with the waterfall, but the whip stitch does offer a nice look to it and might make it a little more durable. And just like that, your rug is bound and complete. I recommend signing the back. It's always fun to sign your work. As you can see here, I signed mine by saying thank you for watching, because I'm thankful for you watching my tutorial. Hopefully you learned something. If you have any further questions, drop them in a comment below. I will be trying to answer as many as I can. I want to help out. If you found this video helpful, please subscribe to the channel. Or if you just like good quality, funny YouTube videos, also subscribe. I got more of those coming too. I appreciate you watching very much. Happy tufting.